The fog did not arrive like a weather report. It crept in slowly, low and silent, swallowing the fields around the Polish village of Lisów before the tank crews even realized how blind they had become. It was just after dawn on August 13th, 1944. The engines of Soviet T-34-85 tanks growled somewhere in the mist, but the men inside could barely see beyond the end of their gun barrels. The world had shrunk to a few meters of wet grass and shifting gray shadows.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
Then, without warning, a flash tore through the whiteness. A deafening crack followed. One T-34 erupted into flame before anyone even understood where the shot had come from. For a few frozen seconds, no one moved. Inside the remaining Soviet tanks, commanders pressed their faces against fogged periscopes, trying to locate the invisible enemy. Nothing, no shape, no muzzle flash. Only the burning silhouette of one of their own, glowing like a torch in the morning haze. Somewhere ahead, hidden behind trees and farm buildings, a German Tiger I had fired from cover, and it was already loading another round. You can almost feel the panic inside those cramped steel turrets, the smell of fuel, sweat, and cordite, the radio crackling with shouted bearings and broken reports. Men twisting hand wheels, peering into a wall of white, knowing the next shell could strike before they ever saw the tank that fired it. This was not a battle of speed. It was a battle of nerves. By the summer of 1944, the Red Army was pushing relentlessly westward. Operation Bagration had shattered German Army Group Center in Belarus. Soviet formations were advancing into eastern Poland with enormous momentum. Entire German divisions had been destroyed. To many Soviet crews, victory felt inevitable. They had better tanks than before, more experience, and overwhelming numbers. The once feared Wehrmacht seemed to be collapsing. But in the village of Lisów, near Staszów, in southeastern Poland, one German heavy tank commander was about to prove that a single concealed Tiger I, used with patience and skill, could still stop an armored attack cold. His name was SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann. By August 1944, he was already one of the most famous tank commanders of the war. Wittmann had earned his reputation in Normandy and on the Eastern Front. He had commanded the formidable Tiger I, a 57-ton machine armed with the devastating 8.8-centimeter KWK-36L/56 gun. At combat ranges of 1,500 meters and beyond, that weapon could punch through the armor of most Allied tanks with frightening ease. The Tiger was slow, mechanically demanding, and produced in small numbers, but in the hands of experienced crews it remained one of the most dangerous armored vehicles in the war. Facing it that morning were T-34-85 tanks, the latest and most improved version of the Soviet Union's most famous armored vehicle. The original T-34 had shocked German troops in 1941 with its sloped armor, wide tracks, and powerful 76.2mm gun. But by 1943, new German tanks like the Panther and Tiger had surpassed it in firepower and optics. Soviet engineers responded by designing a larger three-man turret and installing the 85mm ZIS S-53 gun. This new variant, the T-34-85, entered full production in early 1944. The improvements were significant, and the three-man turret allowed the commander to focus on observation rather than helping load the gun. Better radios improved coordination. The 85mm gun gave Soviet crews a realistic chance of defeating German heavy tanks from the side, and, at close range, even from the front under favorable conditions. Still, the T-34-85 had limitations. Its optics were generally inferior to German Zeiss sights. Crew training varied, and in poor visibility, where target identification depended on experience and calm under pressure, even a capable tank could become vulnerable. The Soviet unit advancing near Lisów belonged to the 53rd Guards Tank Brigade, part of the 6th Guards Tank Corps. These were veteran formations, hardened by years of brutal combat from Kursk to Ukraine. Their crews were not inexperienced recruits. Many had survived dozens of battles, yet they understood both the strengths and weaknesses of their tanks. But on this morning, they faced a problem no amount of courage could solve quickly. They could not see. The terrain around Lisów was deceptively dangerous. Rolling fields, patches of woodland, narrow roads, and scattered farmhouses created ideal ambush positions. The August fog reduced visibility to almost nothing. Soviet commanders expected resistance, but not from a hidden heavy tank perfectly positioned to exploit the terrain. Wittmann and his crew had reached the area during a desperate German attempt to contain Soviet advances toward the Vistula River. The strategic situation was deteriorating rapidly for Germany. Fuel shortages were severe, replacements were scarce. Air superiority belonged to the Allies. Yet local counterattacks were still launched whenever commanders believed they could delay the Red Army. Wittmann's Tiger, tactical number 007, was one of the few operational heavy tanks available. The crew inside the Tiger was highly trained. Each man knew his role with practiced precision. The commander identified targets and issued fire orders. The gunner aligned the sight. The loader rammed a nearly 20-kilogram armor-piercing round into the breech. The driver and radio operator maintained the tank's position and communications. In a well-drilled Tiger crew, these actions took only seconds. In open terrain, the Tiger's greatest advantage was its ability to detect and destroy enemy tanks before they could respond effectively. In fog, that advantage became even more pronounced if the Tiger was stationary and concealed. The Soviet column advanced cautiously, but with limited visibility. Tank commanders leaned from their hatches when possible, trying to see beyond the haze. Infantry support was scattered. Artillery could not engage a target no one could locate. Every sound seemed distorted by the fog. Then came the first shot. The shell, likely a Pesgiar, 39 armor-piercing round, slammed into the lead T-34-85. The Tiger's 88mm gun was more than capable of penetrating the Soviet tank's frontal armor at typical combat distances. The impact tore through steel, ammunition, and fuel. Flames burst from the turret hatches. The crew had little chance. The rest of the column stopped instinctively. That pause was exactly what Wittmann needed. A moving tank is harder to hit. A stationary tank in confusion is a target. Within moments, the Tiger fired again. Yet another T-34 was struck. This one lurched sideways into a ditch, smoke pouring from the engine compartment. Radio traffic became frantic. Soviet commanders attempted to spread out, but maneuvering blindly in fog was perilous. Some tanks reversed, others moved forward. A few fired into suspected positions, but the muzzle flashes only illuminated empty mist. You can almost hear the desperate commands over Soviet radios. Bearings shouted, distances guessed, reports interrupted by static and explosions. Somewhere in that gray wall, an enemy tank was methodically picking them apart. The Tiger's optics played a critical role. German sights, particularly the Turmzielfernrohr series, provided excellent clarity and magnification, even in poor visibility. Yet a trained gunner could detect movement and contrast more effectively than crews with less refined optical systems. Combined with a stable firing position, this gave the Tiger a crucial edge. But technology alone does not explain the ambush. Patience mattered just as much. Wittmann did not reveal his position until the Soviet tanks entered an ideal engagement zone. He allowed them to approach, likely using terrain features such as hedges and buildings to conceal the Tiger's silhouette. By waiting for a clear shot at the lead vehicle, he trapped the rest of the column in uncertainty. This was classic armored ambush doctrine. Destroy the first vehicle to block the route. Destroy the last vehicle to trap the formation. Then engage the tanks in between. Although battlefield conditions rarely unfolded perfectly, The principle was sound. Back in the fog near Lisów, it was devastating. Soviet crews were not passive victims. Several T-34-85s attempted to flank the suspected firing point. Others used high-explosive shells to blast tree lines and structures. Some commanders dismounted briefly to gain a better view, risking sniper and machine gun fire. These were aggressive, determined soldiers, yet every movement exposed them. The Tiger's frontal armor, up to 100 millimeters thick, was difficult for the 85 millimeter gun to penetrate at long range, especially if the shell struck at an angle. To defeat a Tiger reliably, Soviet crews needed side shots, close range, or repeated hits to weak points such as the turret ring or lower side armor. But first, they had to find the target. That was the problem. The fog turned the battlefield into a guessing game, and the Tiger was winning. As more Soviet tanks entered the area, the burning wrecks of earlier victims cast a flickering orange glow through the mist. Black smoke drifted upward, mixing with the fog and making visibility even worse. The battlefield became a maze of fire and confusion. At some point, one Soviet commander reportedly identified the approximate origin of the shots and ordered a rapid advance. Rather than remain stationary, several T-34-85s accelerated toward the suspected position, hoping to close the distance and force a close-range fight where numbers could matter. It was a dangerous but logical decision. The T-34-85 was faster and more maneuverable than the Tiger. Its wide tracks handled soft ground well. At close range, its 85 millimeter gun could be lethal. If multiple tanks attacked simultaneously from different angles, the Tiger could be overwhelmed. Yet Wittmann understood this. The Tiger was powerful, but it was not invincible. Its turret traversed hydraulically, but more slowly than lighter tanks, especially if engine speed dropped. Its side armor was vulnerable. Mechanical failures were always a concern. And once enemy tanks reached short range on multiple bearings, even the best crew could be outmatched. The battle, therefore, became a race. Could the Tiger destroy enough Soviet tanks before they closed in? One after another, the 88 millimeter gun continued to fire. Each shot produced a bright flash and a concussive blast that shook the surrounding countryside. The loader worked furiously, muscles straining as he handled heavy rounds in the cramped turret. Empty casings clanged to the floor. The gunner searched for shapes in the fog. The commander made split-second decisions. Inside the Tiger, the atmosphere would have been intense but controlled. Inside the T-34s, it was chaos. The Soviet crews knew they were facing a heavy German tank, almost certainly a Tiger. They also knew hesitation meant destruction. Some tanks maneuvered around wrecks and pressed forward through smoke and fire. Others attempted to engage from the flanks. Every commander was fighting with limited information and only seconds to react. This is what armored combat often looked like in reality. Not long duels at great distance, not perfectly observed maneuvers, but confusion, sudden violence, and decisions made under extreme pressure. The engagement near Lisów has become one of the most discussed episodes associated with Michael Wittmann. Accounts differ on the exact number of Soviet tanks destroyed and the precise sequence of events. At wartime, claims from all sides were often exaggerated or difficult to verify. However, there is little doubt that Wittmann's Tiger and supporting German forces inflicted significant losses during the clash. For the Soviet crews, the lesson was harsh. A superior operational situation did not eliminate tactical danger. Even in 1944, when Germany was retreating on nearly every front, individual German tank units could still mount deadly resistance if terrain and conditions favored them. The Red Army adapted quickly throughout the war. Soviet doctrine increasingly emphasized reconnaissance, artillery preparation, infantry-tank coordination, and massed maneuver. But battlefield friction could still disrupt even well-planned advances. Fog was one of the greatest equalizers in warfare. It concealed movement, distorted sound, and robbed crews of situational awareness. A tank commander's ability to observe and interpret fleeting shapes often determined survival. For Soviet veterans who had fought from Stalingrad to the Vistula, the fog near Lisów was another reminder that experience reduced fear but never removed uncertainty. At some point in the battle, the Soviet pressure intensified. Tanks and anti-tank guns began to respond more effectively. German positions were increasingly exposed. The Tiger could not remain hidden forever. Every time the 88mm fired, it revealed a flash and sound signature. Every destroyed T-34 narrowed the Soviet search area. The ambusher was becoming the hunted. Wittmann had built his reputation on aggressive tactics and rapid target engagement. But he was also operating within a deteriorating strategic reality. Germany no longer had the industrial capacity to replace tanks and trained crews at the rate they were being lost. Each battle, no matter how tactically successful, bought only time. And time was running out. For the Soviet Union, the T-34-85 symbolized adaptation and endurance. Produced in enormous numbers at factories beyond the Ural Mountains, it represented a wartime system that could absorb losses, learn, and improve. A single ambush could destroy several tanks, but more would continue advancing. This industrial and organizational resilience was decisive. The Tiger I inspired fear and admiration, but only 1,347 were built. The Soviet Union produced tens of thousands of T-34 variants. Quantity alone did not guarantee victory, but over time it exerted relentless pressure. Still, its statistics offer little comfort to the men inside a tank under fire. Imagine sitting in the commander's seat of a T-34-85 that morning. Your vision is limited. The radio is filled with urgent voices. The tank lurches over uneven ground. Then a flash erupts ahead. Another vehicle burns. You know a Tiger is somewhere in the fog, but you cannot see it. You must choose. Stop and risk becoming a stationary target, or move forward into the unknown. That was the reality faced by Soviet crews. Many chose to attack. That choice required extraordinary courage. The T-34-85's crew of 5 depended completely on one another. The commander searched and directed. The gunner aimed. The loader maintained the firing rhythm. The driver maneuvered through mud, smoke, and shell craters. The radio operator assisted with communications and machine gun defense. And survival depended on coordination under intense stress. The same was true inside the Tiger. Tank warfare was not just about machines. It was about teams. The best crews, regardless of nationality, developed a near-instinctive understanding of each other's actions. Commands became concise. Movements became automatic. Seconds were saved. And, in combat, seconds often meant life or death. By August 1944, both German and Soviet armored forces had accumulated enormous combat experience. The men fighting near Lisów were veterans of a war unlike any in history. They had seen entire cities destroyed and front lines shift by thousands of kilometers. Yet on this foggy morning, the war narrowed to a few hundred meters and the silhouettes of tanks emerging from the mist. Eventually, the Soviet advance resumed. German local successes could delay but not reverse the larger strategic tide. Within weeks, the Red Army would continue pushing deeper into Poland, toward the Oder River and ultimately to Berlin. Wittmann himself would not live to see the end of the war. Less than a year later, in Normandy, on August 8, 1944, he was killed when his Tiger was destroyed near Sinto during Operation Totalize. His death remains one of the most studied and debated episodes of the armored war in France. But the battle near Lisów preserved an image that captures the brutal uncertainty of tank combat. Veteran T-34-85 crews advancing through fog, engines straining, periscopes showing only white. Then a sudden flash from concealment, a single Tiger I opening fire. The moment illustrates why the tiger earned its fearsome reputation, and why Soviet crews were respected for continuing to attack despite heavy losses. It also reveals a deeper truth about the Eastern Front. Victory did not belong to the side with the strongest individual tank. It belonged to the side that could endure longer, replace losses faster, and keep moving forward after each ambush. The Tiger was a masterpiece of battlefield lethality. The T-34-85 was a masterpiece of wartime practicality. When they met in conditions like the fog at Lisów, the outcome depended on visibility, positioning, training, and split-second decisions. Sometimes one concealed Tiger could destroy several opponents before being found. Sometimes massed Soviet armor would close in and overwhelm the heavier tank. Every engagement was a contest between fear and discipline. Yet the men inside these vehicles were often in their early 20s. They endured deafening noise, extreme heat, toxic fumes, and the constant possibility of catastrophic fire. Armor plate offered protection, but also trapped crews inside if penetrated. Escape hatches could jam. Ammunition could detonate. Survival was never guaranteed, yet they continued to fight. That morning in the fog, Soviet crews saw almost nothing. They relied on instinct, training, and courage. Then the Tiger fired from cover, and in a matter of seconds, the hidden threat became terrifyingly real. The burning T-34s illuminated the mist like warning beacons. The survivors pressed on. Some would not return. Others would remember the encounter for the rest of their lives. For them, the battle was not about legends or statistics. It was about the sound of an unseen gun, the shock of impact, and the decision to keep advancing anyway. That is what makes the story endure. Not the machines alone, not the famous commander, but the human experience inside the steel. The blindness, the fear, the sudden explosion in the fog, and the determination of men who drove forward even when they could not see what was waiting ahead.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.